Well, we're here tonight to celebrate Janet's book, and if you haven't seen it, it's a very handsome book. And for a first-time book, the publisher did a great job. It is absolutely handsome and a beautiful book. And
she's on the cover.
yes.
That's me. That's me.
The photograph is Janet Casting. So we're going to have a very informal time and look at a few parts of the book and talk to Janet about different parts of her life. This is all her personal story. Janet has an unbelievable passion for surf casting, for fishing from the beach. And I was supposed to give an introduction which says she's the founder of the Martha's Vineyard Surfcasters Association, been on the board of the Martha's Vineyard Bluefish and Striped Bass Derby for many, many years, and has been a very, very leading figure on Martha's Vineyard in terms of the sport fishing community. So let's start off with this. The thing that comes out of this book, Casting into the Light, is that this woman from a very young age to the present has had an extraordinary passion for fishing. Where does that passion come from?
Should I read that little paragraph
Okay,
that we were
sure.
talking about? Okay. You know, one of the answers to that is I kept saying, you know, I just don't know where that comes from. And then I realized that I wrote this little paragraph. I often think, what is it about fishing that has possessed every part of my being, and why? Is it because it brings me close contact with nature? Is it because I love to walk on the beach under the sun and the moon? Or is it the sun and wind and rain in my face? Maybe it's the social game we fishermen play, the sneaky thinking trying to outwit nature and other fishermen. Is it the hunter-gatherer in me that loves to cook and share a meal of fresh fish that I've caught myself? Is it the love of the fish itself? Thinking at first that they all look alike, and now seeing that, like humans, every individual fish is unique from the next? Is it the challenge of the hunt and the long hours of finding and catching them? I deeply feel the ultimate paradox of wanting so badly to hook and land the biggest fish in history, but then I see myself standing over this magnificent creature. Feeling compassion for all the years it evaded other fishermen, and I make the decision to set it free. I don't understand the hold over my entire being the act of fishing has on me. I do know that it's become part of me, and like my dear friend and inspiration, Charlie Cinto says, as long as I can put one foot in front of the other, I'll be fishing.
But let's ask you a really graphic, detailed question. So you leave home on an October evening at 7:30 p.m. and
Usually
you
4:30, usually around sunset.
okay,
that
and you
time of
go
year.
to the beach, and you don't come back home until after dawn,
Yeah.
6 a.m. So you are gone on the beach from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. on
Yeah.
the beach by yourself.
Yeah.
And how does that fit into your life?
Well, you know, I have to admit, I don't do that as much as I used to. It was a lot easier. I used to be able to entertain myself all night, and after 42 years of fishing, I sometimes get a little bored with what's going on between here and here. But as long as there's fish around, you know, I mean, I could be going for hours, and all I need is a little tug, and I get inspired. And, you know, I'm a striped bass fisherman, mostly, and striped bass are nocturnal. And it took me about 3 years to catch a striped bass. I started back in the 70s, and it was more of a boys' club back then, more of a, you know, a men's club. and I wasn't a very welcome sight on the beach. So, I'd hear, oh, there's fish at Squibnocket. So I'd go to Squibnocket after dark because I had learned that striped bass were nocturnal, and I'd look around and I'd go, geez, if there's so many fish here, where is everybody? And, I had to learn that these fish really, you can catch a fish anytime, but they really go with the tides. They really feed with the tides. So I did a lot of wandering around by myself at night, and I did that. And, over the years, the Martha's Vineyard Striped Bass and Bluefish Derby, it started in 1946. And it was started by some of the local businessmen to try to bring business to the island. Warren probably remembers that they used to roll up the sidewalks in September, right after Labor Day, and that was it through the winter. It was like a ghost town. I can remember walking up Circuit Avenue in Oak Bluffs in the early 70s and or late 60s, and it was like a ghost town. All the shops were closed, but they started in 1946, and over the years, it definitely brought more people to the island. And it was a striped bass derby back then. They didn't even have bluefish in the beginning. And bluefish are pretty cyclical, and a lot of the species are very cyclical. They come and they go. And they added the bluefish in, I think, 1952. And at that time, a 4-pound bluefish won the derby, which is a pretty small fish considering today's standards. In the 80s, in 1984, the bass became a species of critical concern, I guess you would say. And so we had a striped bass derby with no striped bass in the tournament. We took the striped bass out of the tournament because there was a moratorium for the next 9 years. But just before that, we started to add bonito and false albacore, which are a small tuna fish. Now, they feed in the daytime. I don't know if Warren knows why, but nobody catches those at night. So, being a bass fisherman, I used to stay up from sunset to sunrise and then go to bed, go home, work on my gear, get some sleep, and go out again at sunset. Then when I became a bonito and false albacore fanatic, when do you go to sleep? The sun comes up and all of a sudden you see those little splashes of the bonito. So now I'm on the hunt for those. So it's become a problem.
Let me just, let's say you go to the beach and you're there at midnight and you fish for 2 hours and catch absolutely nothing and have no action whatsoever. Do you just go home? Or what do you do?
Oh, no. Well, it depends on the tide and the conditions, but if I have any hope at all, I always figure the further I am away from getting a hit, the closer I am to the next one. And, there's been so many years where there's that one last cast. I've caught a fish on, one last cast, and then I get the biggest fish that I've been trying to get. And so, I might do 10,000 one last cast.
Janet has one story in her book about fishing at night by herself on a very foggy night, and she's surprised by someone who appears in the dark. And
this is called the Squeaky Reel. And this kind of describes what it feels like to go down long, desolate roads. On Martha's Vineyard, we have a lot of long, dark, bumpy roads. After fishing the shoreline for many decades, it's become second nature for me to drive alone down long, desolate roads in the darkness to access some of the best fishing spots. Many evenings from May through November, I fish North Neck on Chappaquiddick Island. Anybody been there? North Neck? Chappaquiddick? Oops, I lost my place. To get there, I board the 3-car ferry, the On Time, near Memorial Wharf in Egertown. When I exit the boat, especially during a busy summer season, I can feel the peace and solitude wash over me the minute I drive onto the tiny island called Chappie. About 2 miles down Chappie's only paved road, I turn onto North Neck Road. I weave my way along the bumpy dirt road and park my fishmobile in the small land bank public parking lot, which holds about 5 cars. I take plenty of time to make sure I have everything I need to fish for a few hours before I head up the shell-covered single-lane path towards the gut on foot. The path leads to a steep set of stairs down to a small slice of beach. Climbing the stairs is such a chore that I only want to do it once, hopefully after I catch a big fish. Clothed in chest waders cinched tight with a belt for safety, a hooded sweatshirt, and my lucky fishing cap, I wear a second belt that keeps my pliers handy around my waist, and to light my way, a headlamp around my neck. My backpack is ready with extra hooks and leaders, a rag, a tape measure, a bottle of water, and a rope if I intend on keeping a fish. Last, I carry my precious eels in a bag with an ice pack. On this particular night, there was no moon. It was so dark that I had to walk very slowly on the slippery round rocks near the water's edge. The parking lot had been empty, and I couldn't see any lights as I scanned up and down the beach. I was casting and retrieving my eel ever so slowly. I was relaxing in the darkness, but tensed with the anticipation that any minute I would feel the tug from a large striped bass. Suddenly, a figure appeared out of the darkness. My heart skipped a beat, but calm returned when a gentleman's voice said, "Excuse me, would you mind if I oiled the handle on your reel?" He held up a tube of Pen lube. I had become oblivious to the fact that my old reel was squeaking away with every crank of the handle, and I gladly accepted his offer. So we could both enjoy the silence and tranquility of the night. I told him I thought that I was alone and apologized for disrupting the peace and quiet. He smiled as he squeezed a few drops of oil onto my reel handle, turned and disappeared once again into the darkness of night. Yes, peace and quiet.
This book, Casting into the Light, is rich with those kinds of anecdotes, those stories on the beach. Janet began her writing career writing some of those pieces for magazines. What magazines did they appear in?
Well, I became a taxidermist in 1987. Because of my love for fishing, I had been a waitress for over 25 years. The Home Port, the Black Dog, every restaurant on this island I worked at. The Cliff Diner, the Dock Street Diner. And in 1984, just before they took the bass out of the Derby, my fishing buddy, Jackie Catino, who was my mentor, and he took first in the Derby, and I took second that year. And I wanted to have, as I was learning to fish, and I would hang around with some of the heavy-duty fishermen, they all had this big bass on their wall. And so I would just sit in February and stare at it and think, oh, maybe someday I'll catch a big fish like that. Well, anyway, I got a 45-pounder, and I always wanted a 50, still haven't got a 50, but I figured since it was the last year that bass was in the Derby, I'd have it mounted. And there was nobody doing actual skin mounts. I had a fiberglass reproduction made, which is beautiful, but it's not the actual skin of the fish. So I packed off in 1987 and went to the Pennsylvania Institute of Taxidermy to become a taxidermist. And about a year after I started my taxidermy business, I got a call there was a magazine up in Boston called New England Out of Doors. And they called me and they said, we've lost our taxidermist. Could you write a column about taxidermy? And I said, well, I'm really not a writer. And they said, well, you can kind of make it up. So I thought, okay, I'll give it a try. I wrote about the difference between skin mounts and fiberglass, mounting crabs and lobsters, so I did a monthly article for them. And I noticed every time at the end of my article, I really wanted to be talking about fishing. I'd say, after a hard day's work, I cleaned up my tools and headed out to Chappaquiddick to chase some striped bass. So they went out of business. And shortly after, there was a magazine, and it's a very, very big production now. It's called On the Water Magazine. Before that, I think one of the only fishing magazines that we could get our hands on was Saltwater Sportsman. And they were targeting more of the boat fishermen and not so much of the shore fishermen. So they came to me and they said, we really want to target fly fishing and fishing from the shore. And they said, would you mind being our writer? And I said, well, I'm really not a writer, but I'll give it a whirl. And so I did that for about 20 years, writing. It developed into writing specific articles that actually were the basis of this book. And after that, I was working on a couple of articles for a local magazine like Edible Vineyard. I wrote an article called Trash Fish to Gourmet. And I was invited into Cynthia Riggs's Wednesday night writing group. Cynthia, she has 14 island mysteries on the shelves, and we have a little Wednesday night writing group. And what we do is we bring, they don't change what you're writing if there's writers out there. We just bring maybe 4 or 5 pages of what we're working on, and we read it. Just reading what you've written out loud is eye-opening. When you sit at your computer all day just writing, and to read it out loud is really... it opens your eyes. So, I'd be reading what I wrote, and we went out and snagged some bunker, and they're going, what are you talking about? It's like, doesn't everybody know what snagging bunker is? So I would be using all the fishing terminology, and they had no idea what I was talking about. So with their inspiration, they kind of taught me how to talk to is it called normal people? Yeah. So, that was how I started to put this book together. And through a chain of events, I got to the point where, actually, they made me put more of me into it. I wanted to share my 42 years of fishing on the island and all the changes in people's attitudes, changes in the fish species, a lot of changes in the last 40 some odd years. And so I was talking, I would bring to class all these statistics, and they said, you can't, that's boring. You have to put you into it. And I said, I don't want to talk about me, I just want to tell everybody what I've seen. But they inspired me to put more of my story into the book, and they were right. And so I got the book together enough that I started sending out query letters and proposals looking for a publisher. And there's a friend of mine, her name is Jenny Seward. I've known her since the early Black Dog days. And she said, a really good friend of mine is named Victoria Wilson. She's the vice president and senior editor of Knopf. And she grew up on the island. And she might be interested in your writing. So I sent Vicki 3 chapters, and luckily I put Jenny Seward's name at the top, because I think she said to me, if I didn't see Jenny's name, I probably would have thrown it in the garbage. But she read it, and she read a couple of chapters, and because of her love for Martha's Vineyard, she fell in love with the book. And I signed a contract with Knopf in November, almost 2 years ago now, and then the work began. She helped me, and she's my editor, helped me and guided me not to take much out, but to put more in, to really. So she helped to make this a really incredible book. And I fought her the whole way. I didn't like the name. I was speaking in New Jersey 3 or 4 years ago to I speak for fishing clubs. Here I was, a woman who had no idea what I was doing. I didn't have a clue. And now they ask me to come off island and speak to these really big fishing clubs. But there was 1,300 fishermen came through the door that day. And my writing group said, what an opportunity to tell them that you have a book coming out. So through trial and error, we came up with The Lure of the Surf. Kind of clever, It was like, how did a 5'1" woman, become a legendary surf fisherman on Martha's Vineyard, blah, blah, blah. Vicki hated it. She was like, off the table, I hate it. And I guess, she kept saying to me, this is not a fishing book. I kept saying, it's a fishing book. I'm writing a fishing book. She's so right. She wanted to have a larger audience, and there's some how-to in it, but it's not a how-to fishing book. And so, The Lure of the Surf came off the table. And at one point she said, she came up with, how about casting into the darkness? I said, you know what? I can live with that. Whatever you start in life, you're always casting into the darkness before you become enlightened, no matter what it is you're doing. So I said, all right, I can live with that, casting into the darkness. I didn't know what I was doing. And then she called me the next day and she said, I hate it. I'm like, oh, God, here she goes again. And she said, I want to call it casting into the light. I didn't like it, and nothing against Jesus. He was great guy 2,000 years ago, but I felt like it sounded too religious. Casting into the light for Jesus. So she said it's not religious, and this does not have a religious connotation behind. I don't know if that's the right word. So it became casting into the light. And then the photograph, which was taken by a young man who you'll read about in the book, a young man named Ben Scott, who I met through fishing. He was 18 years old, and I was in my 50s, and we became little soulmates. Poor Warren, he's just sitting here. Am I blabbing too much? It's one of the things about fishing, it's just brought me together with so many people. There's no boundaries when you're out there on the beach and you meet people. Here was this 18-year-old kid just getting ready to go to Rhode Island School of Design, and I was in my 50s. I knew his grandfather, and he wanted to be a photographer when he grew up. And, so I have another friend named Mike Laptu who took a beautiful picture of me at Squibnocket, and it was a very colorful picture. I was in my waders and the waves and the rocks, and I thought that was a better picture. But once again, Vicki Wilson was right. This is the correct cover and the correct title for this book.
You touched on a couple of ideas there that are very important in the book, and that is that it's not just a fishing story.
Right.
It is a story about a young woman coming to Martha's Vineyard and becoming passionate about fishing and entering a world that is mostly male and fighting for your spot. And the book really talks about that a great deal. Can you say a little bit more about how you approached being in as a 5'1" woman into this world of men who drive pickup trucks and have fish mobiles and run up and down the beach?
Well, in 1978, I got my own first fish mobile. It was a little yellow International Scout. And what freedom that gave me. I no longer had to carry my backpack or depend on anybody else to bring me out four-wheel driving. And, I learned that you don't just walk up to these fishermen and say, how do you do it? Will you teach me? Because nobody would take me seriously. And so I realized I had to learn what I could on my own. I hung around, there was a tackle shop. I don't know if you remember Luke's Tackle Shop on Beach Road. I used to sit on the freezer and just listen to the guys as they were talking, So mostly by observing is how I learned in the beginning. And I could catch bluefish because in the 70s, bluefish were very abundant on this island. And I could go to Wasky Point. In fact, there's stories here in the book, catch hundreds of pounds of bluefish. I worked at the restaurants in the nighttime, and I would, load the back of my car full of fish, run home, drop them off at the restaurants, run home, take a shower, and I would go and serve the same fish that I caught that day. But the striped bass eluded me. Like I said, it took me, 3 years to catch a striped bass. And luckily, there's a man, unfortunately, he was schizophrenic, and schizophrenia took him down in 1991, but he was a fabulous fisherman. It's at the end of the world? Oh, it's just an ambulance. And so Jackie took me under his wing and taught me how to fish for striped bass. There was a lot that I learned on my own, but having a mentor was key for me. I just want to say one thing about Warren. Years ago, actually, my husband, I'm married to Tristan Israel. He's a local politician. He just retired from being a taxidermist, a selectman in Tisbury for the last 25 years. But Tristan noticed that there was no organization on the island for fishermen that was under the umbrella of the county. And so when they make laws, and rules for fishermen, commercial and recreational, there was nobody to really represent them from Martha's Vineyard. So Tristan was instrumental in starting a group called the Dukes County Fishermen's Association. And Warren was the president for the first, I don't know how many years. And Warren was nice enough to let me come into that group because I wanted to be a liaison between the commercial and the recreational fishing world. Because, I just think when you're involved with one sector of whatever it is you're interested in, you can see this far. And with the fisheries, I've tried to stay out of the political arena with being a fisherman, but I can't. There's so much to learn about, the ocean, the fish, pollution, the whole schmeal. And so, that they allowed me to come to these commercial fishing meetings so that I could learn, because I don't like it when it's like, oh, the striped bass are disappearing because it's the commercial fishermen, they take them all. It's so hard to pinpoint what's going on in the world. And I'm not just talking about fishing. I mean, with anything that you're interested in, I think, it's so important to gather information on both sides.
Let me just, we're going to take some questions in a minute, but before we do that, you touched on the politics of fisheries management there. So it might be a very popular opinion out there from people who read the newspaper that there are no fish left in the ocean and that we are on a steady downhill slide and that it's all going to, 20 years from now, there are going to be no fishermen on the beach because there won't be any fish in the ocean. How do you respond to that?
Wow. I hope not. I know that we're a little bit too late. We're doing a little bit too little, a little too late. But maybe it's not too late, Warren, you're scaring me. I hope that doesn't happen. Most of the fishermen I know, I send back 98% of the fish that I catch. I am not opposed to somebody obeying their state law and taking, a fish, harvesting a fish. I don't like calling it kill. I think when you kill a fish or kill anything, it's like you take it and waste it. But when you harvest something, to take a fish and to share it, I don't see anything wrong with that. But I know most of the fishermen I know, we have a really hard time taking any fish, even for harvest. And I don't know the answer to that, Warren. I know it starts right at the bottom. If you're readers, there's another really important book called The Most Important Fish of the Sea by a man named Bruce Franklin, and it's all about the menhaden. And I think that's an important read for anybody who lives on the ocean, interested in fishing, interested in ecology. I don't even know him, and I'm hyping his book. Why, do you think we're going to be out of fish?
No, I think we're
Out of time?
no. That's there must be a fire alarm that has gone off because
Oh, you on the fire department?
what?
Are you on the fire
No,
department?
no, I'm not on the fire department. But they're gonna. That's what the siren is all about. It's for a fire alarm that somebody's having a problem somewhere, and our police and fire will respond. Well, I don't know if there are any fishermen in the audience here. Janet is an expert surf caster, shore fisherman. She offers guides to people.
No, I retired.
You've retired? Okay, all right. And I know she's done a wonderful job when we've had programs for wounded veterans here on Martha's Vineyard, taking vets out fishing on the beach, even if they're in a wheelchair, and figuring out how to cast from a wheelchair and so on and so forth. But if there are any questions that relate to fishing from the beach, here's the expert.
I'm a freshwater fisherwoman with my dad. It's probably the most wonderful moments I ever had. And I came to the vineyard and took up shore casting because I felt grounded. I haven't caught a fish yet. So I'm encouraged by your 3-year striped bass. I'm intimidated by the men on the shore, but I just keep going one more and my hands get really sore. What's the one thing you can tell me? I don't know that I really want to catch a fish, but what's the one piece of advice you can give to me as an older woman being on the shore? I love it.
Yeah.
Like, am I ever going to catch a fish?
First thing is make sure you have a good knot, just in case you do get a fish, because I lost a lot of fish when I did catch when I did get a hit because I couldn't tie a knot. And just, the only way I know how to catch a fish is to keep your line in the water because you never know. But, make sure your gear's in good condition just in case you get that fish. But, you just never know what you're going to catch. And, don't let anybody intimidate you because we all started somewhere. So yeah, just keep. I would give a 3-hour workshop on how to catch fish. Use this certain certain lure. Reading tide chart. But the thing is, in fact, I have a chapter in the book called Rules and Exceptions. Every rule I've ever known in fishing, I've seen it been broken.
Okay,
so
good.
the best thing is just keep plugging because you never know.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question about the rules chapter,
About what, Tommy?
about the chapter on rules and exceptions.
Can you get a little closer to the mic?
The chapter on the rules collection, rules exceptions.
Oh, the rules and exceptions,
Right.
right.
Would you explain to these people what you did to during the Derby, of course, because it's competition, what you did to your good friend Hawkeye?
What did I do to Hawkeye?
Yeah. Remember when you were catching the 40 and 50 fish? She's even blanked this out.
I didn't tell him. Well, there's a lot of secrecy about fishing. And I was on the South Shore, I'm not going to tell you exactly where one night, and I just hit this spot, and it was during the Derby. And there was, usually if you find some structure, a jetty, a sandbar, it's usually a good place to target fish, or you find a pot of bait. This night it was a new moon. No, it was a full moon, and it was dead low tide, which isn't the best time to fish. But I hit this pot of magnificent bass. I caught over 40 bass that night. Every time my plug hit the water, it was like bang. And I had already had like a 20-some-odd pound fish weighed in, so I didn't end up keeping one. But I was on the South Shore, and I was by myself, and I'd see some lights coming, so I'd back up to the car. And even, like Tommy said, I had a really good friend named Hawkeye. His name was Bobby Jacobs. And Hawkeye came by, and, it's like, this really sucks. Full moon, low water, no fish. And I'm going, yeah, this is awful. And So then he drove by. As soon as he left, I start fishing again. Bang! Every time my plug hit the water, bang! Here comes some lights coming the other way. So, back up to the car. So, I feel bad, but that's, hey, it was Derby time. It was during the Derby.
I fished as a kid.
Yeah.
Always in Oak Bluffs off the steamship when we could.
Oh, was I there?
Probably.
Yeah.
But now I don't fish because I don't want to kill them. I
Right.
don't eat them.
Harvest, right?
They're too small. I don't know how to fish anymore.
Right.
But I want to know a suggestion for how I can, because I love fishing, how I can do it without getting them to swallow the damn hook, so I can release them.
Really good question. That's a really excellent question. In fact, my husband's cousin was visiting yesterday, and I thought, okay, let's go catch some scup, which are, little fish. In Massachusetts now, they just made a law this year that's in effect, right? You have to use what's called a circle hook whenever you're using bait. And it's a miraculous little hook that the J hook is shaped like a J. A circle hook comes around more. And I said to my husband, I better go get some little tiny, I have big circle hooks for slinging eels. I said, I better go get some because if I'm down at the drawbridge and somebody sees me fishing without a circle hook, it'll make front page news, But yeah, and in fact, it is the law now. If you go to the tackle shop and you ask for a circle hook, and the way that they work is the regular J hook, when a fish takes it, it can sometimes go down their gullet. We don't like that to happen, but you can't control that, especially if it's a really aggressive fish and he really grabs your bait. It's going to go down and you're going to get stuck on his or her esophagus, and so you hurt the fish. The circle hook, and I say 99% of the time, when you start to bring your fish in, it comes out of there, it won't hook up to the esophagus, and when the fish, his natural tendency is to swim away from you. As it's swimming away from you, it gets stuck right in the corner of its mouth. And it works, I would say, 99% of the time. It's fabulous. You know, Tommy, right? Have you used circle hooks? I've been using them for 20 years now. So really, if you want to fish and you want to do catch and release, and you use bait, even if it's for a little scup or, for a big striped bass, you can buy circle hooks. You're welcome.
Another question over here.
You've been fishing for 45 years, and just going a little bit to what Warren was talking about, is so maybe we're not going to fish in the oceans. Have you noticed a decline in fishing?
Oh, absolutely. And I wish I could pinpoint the answer to why. I know it's because when I started fishing, we didn't understand it in the Hudson Bay and the Chesapeake Bay. They were dumping PCPs in the water where the fish spawned. The menhaden that I talk about, down in the Chesapeake Bay area, they have big factory trawlers that were taking billions of pounds of menhaden and reducing them into omega-3 oils. So they took away the forage fish for the whales, the striped bass, the swordfish. So we have pollution. We've upset the ecosystem so badly. In my taxidermy business, when I first started in '87, a 50-inch fish would usually weigh 50 pounds. By the 1990s, I was seeing 50-inch fish that barely weighed 36 pounds. They were emaciated. They have nothing to eat. The poor striped bass were picking up rocks, and, they eat mussels and crabs anyway. But they were, so we've upset the ecosystem. And then, of course, the regulations, and probably Warren can talk a little bit more about the commercial fishing. And I don't like to blame the commercial fishing, but, we definitely have had much stricter rules than we used to about the take of fish. What are you going to do? There's more people in the world, and they have to eat. So, where's the fish going to come from? They have to get them commercially, right? What do you think, Warren? Let me pull you into this conversation.
We have worked in New England with lots of fisheries regulations. We've cut back the catch over and over and over again, and there have been some successes for reasons that are hard to explain. We have a pretty healthy stock of haddock in New England waters, and we don't have a healthy stock of cod. So we have a very healthy stock of sea scallops, but we don't have a healthy stock of bay scallops. And so in some areas, fisheries management has worked well. The striped bass that you're so interested in has good science behind it. And we have good regulations that spend a lot of time studying the year class. So there will be a 2019 year class, meaning the number of little baby striped bass fry that are born during 2019. And then we will monitor that stock for 5 years before it becomes harvestable. But studying the year class, studying the biomass of each species, and then trying to have a total allowable catch that fits that to keep it sustainable is the goal. And sometimes our management has succeeded, and sometimes it hasn't.
Can you, now I'm going to put him on the hot seat. Can you, black sea bass. I remember when I caught my very first black sea bass. It was back in the 70s. I was on Singer's Jetty in West Chop. And I thought, oh, I got a fish. This is when I didn't have a clue. Oh, I got a fish. No, it's a weed. Oh, no, maybe it's a rag. Oh, no, it's a fish. And it was a fish. And it was a black sea bass. And I put my light on it at night. They call them black sea bass. Oh, it was so beautiful. They're so full of blue iridescence. And they have these fabulous, flowery fins. And that was the first one I caught. I didn't see another one for probably, I'm going to say about 30 years. And then Robbie Nevin, who was a diver. One time I was hanging around Memorial Wharf in Eggatown. He took a dive and he said, the bottom of Eggatown Harbor, you couldn't even see the bottom because it was full of little tiny baby black sea bass. And so from what I understand now, they're back, and I don't know if they're cyclical or if we brought them back, but it's a problem, right? Because they're a very aggressive fish that eats a lot of things, can you speak to that one?
Well, a black sea bass is a very successful fisheries management program. It's a very popular fish in the market. It brings a high price. It's particularly popular with Asian Americans. So it's very popular in Chinese restaurants in New York City and in Boston. And it is a fish that is moving north as the water temperature rises. So this used to be a fish that was very big in New Jersey and in Virginia, and now it really has moved up south of the Cape. So in our area, the New York Bight up through Cape Cod Canal and through Nantucket and Vineyard Sounds, the black sea bass are very popular. They've really moved in. It is one of the fish that, from a commercial point of view, that we can target more. And it's also a fish that we can harvest in a very sustainable way because it pots. So you can catch black sea bass the same way you catch lobsters in lobster pots. And it's a very green or ecological way of fishing because when you bring the pot up onto the boat, if the fish are too small or if they're the wrong species, you throw them back. They're still alive. They weren't on a hook or anything. And so I think black sea bass has a real future for both our headboat fishermen, like I'm sure the skipper out of Oak Bluffs Harbor is getting a lot of sea bass, and the young kids who go fishing can get 3 or 4 sea bass. And I think it's being well managed. It has a good stock assessment with a total allowable catch that's allowed. And I think it's the future of quite a bit of fishing here. It's not exciting as a sport fish.
Right. Yeah, but there's so much I don't understand about what's going on in the ocean. Why do they stop the commercial season, the recreational season so early? Because I know during the Derby is when I do a little bit, I shun my responsibilities and I do a little bit more fishing than I do the rest of the year. And during the Derby, sometimes off a Memorial Dock, when I'm fishing for bonita, I'll catch a black sea bass, like a monster, and I have to throw them back because I can't eat them. So why do they stop the recreational season so early? Do you know?
The state, I can't always say that the state makes rational decisions, but they will come up with what they think is the total allowable catch, meaning the number of pounds that should be caught by recreational fishermen and the total number of pounds that should be caught by commercial fishermen. The commercial fishermen have to report their catch when it's sold, so we get an exact count of when we hit 1 million pounds, and then the fishery's closed. The recreational fishery, they're taking a guess because it's not reported as completely. So the state guessed that the recreational quota was caught by a certain date, and they closed the fishery. Well, okay, we're getting off onto a different tangent here. We want to make sure that we celebrate Janet's book, Casting into the Light. Another question? Yes, I think people are looking at it, and our time is up. But yeah, that is a very good point, and it's definitely happening. And the fish populations are changing. They're relocating as the water temperature warms up. And that Woods Hole Oceanographic is very aware of that. The fisheries managers, it's hard to predict what's going to happen because the water temperature has been rising faster than people predicted it. And for some reason, the Gulf of Maine, north of the Cape, is experiencing faster temperature rise than we are south of Martha's Vineyard. So there are areas where the water temperature is changing rapidly, and the fish are going to change. They're going to move.
See what happens when you just want to be a fisherman. You just want to go out and catch some fish. You end up having to get into science and politics and... One more? Can we take one more?
One more question.
What's the next project you're working on?
For me, well, you know, I'm taking a little hiatus with writing, but I started to write down some notes. You mean as far as writing? And I said to my, Vicki Wilson, I said, you know, should I start thinking about writing again? She said, just do this book right now, and I'll let you know when it's time to go on. So, you know, this book is bigger than I ever thought it could be. And, yeah, so I'm just going to do this book right now. It's about all I can do.
And Pantheon did a great job.
Absolutely.
It's her first book. This is a handsome book. Pictures in it, and it's just, you know, a map in the front, and it's beautifully done.
I wish I could take credit.
So, they did you proud.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
Janet will be signing books.
Yes. Thank you.